All right, so we're going to dive into this. There's a lot to cover, so we're just going to get started. So that's us. You get to see us twice, apparently. So, hi, that's me. That's me in my jammies. I hate talking about myself, so instead, I'm just trying to convince my accountant that my jammies are actually tax write-off because they're in every profile picture that I put up, and they will be until he accepts that.
And I am Anthony, lead programmer on Go-Go Town. I wear many hats, like a fancy wizard's hat, witch hat. Yeah.
And so just briefly, Prideful Sloth, if you don't know who we are, we've been around for just under 10 years now. We're a core team of 5 people, industry veterans. Our team has over 90 years experience amongst the 5 of us. So yeah, we're old. And so really, this is like a part of the speedrun side of it, just a bit of background why we're here and what started this process and why we're talking about this. We got some really great business advice along the way from Jason De La Roca. He also pointed us back to Stray Fun, a really interesting independent studio. If you don't know who they are, check them out. Philomena's done a lot of great talks, but they did a big talk on their Nomadus demo as well too along the way. And I'll have some links at the end for stuff that you can look at more directly about this. And so, straight into it, what do we call a playtest? Just to be very clear, because playtests mean many things to many people. We're talking mass public, not in our office. This is just people on the internet playtest. They're non-NDA'd, they're content creators. We're not stopping anybody from playing. We're not stopping anybody from talking about it. And when we say mass, we're talking in the time that we ran the demo and playtest, we probably had about 150,000 players through our game in that period. So, and they're always limited time playtests. We ran 4, we ran them for generally 2 to 4 weeks depending, and then we close them down, we take that advice, we start the next process. So the question is really, why do you want to go down this route? So effectively, it's a tool. Playtests are a tool like any other production tool available to you, and they're a tool that will help you engineer success. But you still need a good game. This is not going to take a game that isn't viable and turn it into one. Maybe it will, but like if you want people to play and feedback, there needs to be the bones of a good game that already exists. And we always say it needs to be the right type of game, because if you're a 2-hour linear narrative adventure, you've basically just given your entire game away for free when you play test. So there are certain games that don't really fit the model in the right way for this. There's probably ways you can playtest those, but in the model we did, it wouldn't work. But you'll need an audience for your game, and you'll need to understand how you want to run and define a playtest for your own purposes. And you need the ability to cope with criticism. Anthony has a nice graph of all the feedback. Some was positive, but also, that criticism, that's what you really want at this stage. You want the feedback that's not nice, but you also need to be okay with the not nice. So again, how does this work? You're getting feedback as early as possible. These are pre-alpha builds. These were development builds. We started our first playtest about 14 months into development. So this is very early. Core game loop was there, and basically that's what you want. You want to validate that concept. Does the loop work? Does the next thing I add to the loop work? And you want to keep iterating through these. You're building your community. We've got the stats at the end. We can talk through that. But these are people playing your game. These are your early adopters at this stage. So you want to build them. You're also populating the internet with your game. It is a great marketing tool if you utilize it. From day one, from our first playtest, because it wasn't NDA'd, people talked about our game. And so you can Google it and you can find a year's history on our game now. So that's a great tool if you run it properly as well too. And generally, it's the Steam algorithm. We're all slaves to the algorithm. When you start to getting to the point where you release your game, you have built up your community and you're like, hey, guess what? The game's out. And everybody's like, oh, okay. Wow, let's go to the Steam page and let's buy your game. And then Steam is suddenly like, oh, hi there, I see your game's really popular. Let me introduce your game to other people. And so basically this is a way to work the algorithm to your favor and get it to think, hey, I'm actually a popular game. You should be telling other people about how awesome my game is. So really, this is kind of the side where we went into the oh God, why are we doing this? This seems like a dumb idea. Why do we want to do this? Because what if you get the negative feedback? There's so much early content about a game that's nowhere near finished out there. But I'm giving this game away for free. These are the early questions we answered. And the thing is your game will get better over time if you're listening to the feedback. And that's what you want. You can fix it. Or there might be a thing of maybe this isn't something that's worth fixing. And that's up to each individual to determine. But just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should make the thing that you're doing. And that's what you're trying to validate. You also get the streams and the content, and it will be up forever. Yes, that is correct. But there's a shelf life on content. People really don't care about content that's over X amount of time old. And so if you're showing progress and you're continually making something newer and somebody's creating a newer stream and a newer stream, that's the stuff that's going to get shown to people. So you can bury the old stuff and the not so pretty stuff over time with the better stuff and show your progress. And yes, you are giving your game away for free, but it's not. You need to consider this as a transaction. I'm giving you something, and you're taking the time to play it, and you're taking the time to feed back on me. It's a transaction, and it is an investment. And so removing free from the concept of it, because you're getting so much from from those stats. You're getting all that value from an individual. So it's not free. Somebody's time has gone into taking the time to feed back to you. And so running playtests. All right, this is where we get into the fun stuff. So this is a very simple, I'm assuming you all know how to make games and you know how to put them up on Steam. So we're basically, for us, playtests meant we had an email list set up, and it was a transaction of you give me an email, I give you a playtest code. So to do that, we had to request codes from Steam, which request them in advance. They can take days when you start doing bulk code requests. But also with that, you need to determine how do you want this to function for us. We gave out codes, then we used MailerLite, but we also then took and said we need some sort of distribution method post that initial mail out, because people will continue to come. So you need to determine for yourself, do you want FOMO or do you want to give stuff ongoing? We found for our community type, FOMO didn't really work very well. People were actually more upset if they couldn't get access. So we had a coupon, we used coupon carrier and basically set it up so as people signed up during the length of the playtest, they would then get a code so they could join at any point. But again, different games might work differently, and we found instant access was much better than FOMO. And the other one is consider what you want when you're setting up your playtest. What is it that you want from the user, and what do you want to know from them? Because you're getting emails, you're getting this direct contact, so utilize it. Don't just get this data and do nothing with it. Ask people questions, find out, get meaning from having these emails, which is also why I don't bother with the Steam playtest function, because you do that, and with the Steam playtest function, what happens is you don't know who your user is. They sign up via Steam saying, yes, I'm interested in playtesting this game. You lose that access. That's why you go directly via an email to do that, because then you can give surveys, you can do these things, where otherwise going through Steam, you lose the individual as value.
Right, so from there we get on to tech prep and what's involved in, actually what do you need to do from an engineering perspective to get things ready for a playtest. The first most important thing for me, at least anyway, was don't break player saves if you can help it. It entirely depends on your style of game, but Go-Go Town was largely a game built by player expression and ownership, and losing 10 hours of progress is a bummer. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but generally I'd recommend trying to build some sort of save serialization system that has versioning built into it that allows you to make iterative changes without breaking, what your players have spent so much time putting together. Because you want that flexibility and you want that stability. After that, it's about getting your hands on data, because that's what this is really about, right? Making your game better. I like to think that there's sort of two styles of data. There's passive and there's active. So passive is generally things that don't require any extra effort on behalf of the player. So that's analytics, error reporting, crash reporting, that sort of stuff. I say crash reporting, your build should be stable. You're releasing a game here, but and you want feedback on gameplay, right? You don't want feedback about players getting stuck in walls. That's less, useful. But we're all human, and if you're doing this right, you're doing a playtest at an early point, so pre-alpha, like we said we were doing. So some issues are going to slip through the cracks. So yeah, make sure you're using some sort of crashing and error reporting. Unity has a great one built in. And then you can use that to quickly determine the stability of your playtest. Fix any blockers so that then the players can actually enjoy what they're doing and can actually start sending you stuff that you find meaningful. And then you can take note of the less serious issues, and then you can come back and fix those ones later. Analytics is obviously another very important part of this process. It's extremely useful to understand player behavior. Great for really, really large user sets. When it becomes a lot harder to gain personal information from each individual player. Once again, it depends on the type of game and the goals of your individual playtest. And it can often take a significant amount of time to take that data and turn it into something meaningful. There's a phrase, garbage in, garbage out. So you want to make sure that the events you're tracking in your game are relevant and that you then turn that into data that is meaningful internally. We didn't rely too heavily on analytics. We mainly used it for basic things like session time and number of players and that sort of thing, used for playtime and retention, and then we focus more on the active side of things. So active is requires active participation from the players, but in order to do that, you need really low friction, because you want to make sure that they're encouraged and excited to give feedback. The two major ways and the two ways we used public forums. So we had sections set up in our Discord chat, which allowed people to post threads and receive feedback from the developers. It's great for back and forth communication, and it really shows the players that they're being heard by us. But it does require some moderation because it can get quite noisy. Whereas the in-game reporting is my personal favorite. It allows the player to send feedback at any point in the game, and it also allows us to send some extra information as well, which can be really, really useful to gauge intent and if there was an issue, determine exactly what that was and how we might resolve it. So this was our reporter there on the left. Yes, left. Quite simple. Any point in the game, player can press F8 or from any of the pause menus, load up the feedback form. Simple description. Add in a Discord username if they want us to be able to contact them later on and get more information. Set a category for the task, for the report, and then a simple mood emotion to submit. So we get a great bit of a great data set from just filling in that form. We also have underneath that, we send non-identifying data, we send language, session time, number of players, as well as a screenshot and the latest save of the game, which can come in very, very handy if you're trying to diagnose an issue or if you just want to reproduce or have a look at how the player has set up their environment and what the sort of things they're doing. And then that's all uploaded to Amazon, stored in a database, NoSQL database, and then we can collate that down into CSV and import it into our feedback reporter, which lists all the feedback that we get, sorted by version, category. We get our screenshot, we get our description. One of the most important things that we realized fairly early on is that we have quite a large non-English speaking community. So we're all English speaking, we need a translation. So we inbuilt auto-translate into the feedback tool itself, which is incredibly useful. And then most importantly, it also allows us to create JIRA tasks, bugs, and actionable items straight from the tool, which will then take essentially exactly what you're seeing here, import it into JIRA so we can action those items. Yes, where's next? So you've got data, people are playing. What next? So for me, first thing, fix blockers. If you've got, like I said before, if there's problems in the flow, if there's things that are stopping your players from engaging in the game, you want to get those done and out of the way as quickly as possible. And then it goes on to analyzing and collating data. So you need to take all that information you got from the players, determine what's relevant, and see if it needs to be actioned now or if it's something that can wait later on. Once again, it's going to depend on the goals of your playtest. It's always really good to have a goal going in so you know if something is going counter, against that goal or if it's moving towards it. For me, I spent a large amount of my time going through all of that player feedback, categorizing it into buckets and tallying them up so we knew what the issues that the users were most, what they were most concerned about, what they were most happy about, what they were most unhappy about, making a spreadsheet with tallies in that, so then we could use that to inform our decisions moving forward. It's also really good at this point to continue engaging with the audience. Make sure you're engaging with the community. Players report based on feeling, so it's often, a lot of the time, you need to determine what made them feel that way. And then it also lets them know you're actively listening to them. And I think every member of the team is on Discord and we're all talking with our community all the way through. And then iterating. So make changes and monitor sentiment. Depending on the length of the playtest, it might be good just to leave it as is and not do much iteration. But if there's an overwhelming amount of feedback in one direction and you have the time, it is something to consider. It is tempting to drop everything and change everything on the smallest piece of feedback, but just hold fast and take some time to really think about the sort of information you're getting from your players. You can see a graph there on the side. That's essentially the breakdown of the feedback that we've received from our players over the course of our playtest. So each of the spikes is one of the playtests. There's one in the middle there that's a little bit longer, which we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, ultimately, that's the general way to go through that sort of stuff.
So takeaways is the long part of this. That's why we're going through the startup. Also want to leave some room for questions because this is a big topic that I can spend hours talking about. This is a fun side of where we start getting into understanding what the playtest meant for us, where the data actually came into it. So we, in running our playtests, one of the first things we always did was try and tie them to marketing beats. Especially early on when you don't have a lot of people in your audience and you need to find your audience and talk to your audience, marketing beats were very much for us. So we announced our game in March of 2023, and then we announced in June 2023 that we would be hosting our first playtest. We used Wholesome Direct for that because that's where we knew our audience was going to be, and so that was our starting point for the first one. You can see there growth or lack of growth sometimes over time, but this is an interesting one where the email, this is just purely email subscribers. This isn't even just our wish list, and you can see that as we go through the slides, the difference in data that we're getting at different points, and they don't necessarily, the number of email subscribers doesn't marry up to the number of wish lists, but they both have value and they're both actually really interesting. So with this, again, the first one was in July 2023. It was our first one. It was pretty quiet. I think we saw around 2,000 players come through, which is still a good starting point, and better to test your systems early, which is the other side. This is why we have those systems. This is why they're in. Start testing all these early rather than going to V1 and go, okay, now I'm here. Let's release, and here's all my systems at the same time. Because we had issues where we were finding that there was problems with saves coming from China as well too at one point. So all of this stuff was before release. It allowed us to fail, and it allows us to fail gracefully or have technical problems, whichever word you choose to use in this. And we could correct those problems before we released rather than finding out all these problems at release, which is generally not the time you want to find that your systems aren't working. So again, our second one was in September. This was an interesting one because this, we self-announced it about a week before Gamescom, and this was our multilingual playtest. So again, we got to test our language systems out. We got to start working with our localizers early. We started to get feedback on localization as well. This one was really shot off for us. And this second one, and we targeted our top 10 languages, our top 10 non-English territories, got that in. And this became a really interesting one, data point-wise for us, if nothing else, where we realized China was actually a very interesting audience for us. We saw a large uptick during this one and a large interest coming out of China, and we realized we needed to keep an eye on this. Now, most people talk about Steam and say that, you know, China is generally about their second biggest audience. At that point, that dynamic shifted to becoming our largest wish-listed territory, our largest email territory. So we went, oh, okay, let's go through this, let's keep an eye on it, but hey, that's great, you know, like, it's always fantastic to understand where your audiences are coming from and getting that early. Again, you can see here the wish list versus the email sign up. We got low-level virility in China for that playtest as well too, which was great. So we got a lot of new users coming in. Again, our November one was very quiet. Look, we all know this time of year is always quiet, no matter what you do, unless you're the next big thing coming out. So we knew that was going to be a quiet period for us coming in, but it was good because it allowed us to test a few things that we had gotten feedback on early. That was basically, we found out one of the ones people did not like our tutorial system. I hate tutorial systems. Everybody hates writing tutorial systems because we write them multiple times. And yes, they hated it. So it was good because we got that feedback as early as July. We took time to revisit and rethink about it. We had a nice quiet one so that we knew in that quiet period it was going to be our more engaged players in the November one that we could workshop out to them and see how they felt about it. And it was mainly going to be the people in Discord. It was going to be our core community picking up this one. So that was a great time to workshop a few more of the bigger changes that we could get more feedback on. And so that was fantastic to have that quiet one. In the sort of November period as well too, we did an announcement for our co-op playtest coming in 2024. We used the Wholesome Snack as part of the games. The Jeff Keighley thing. Words, yeah, the Game Awards, thank you. I'm like, oh, that thing. So that was a quiet period, but good. And then you can see the co-op one really shot off. I'm like, I was pulling these stats and I'm like, oh God, I didn't realize it was that big. So you can see when we did that. The co-op one was an interesting one for us. We ran it for longer. We ran it in waves. The minute you start playing with any form of multiplayer system, we chose waves for this one for a few reasons. One being that if something was going to break early, we didn't want all of our users to dogpile in at the start, which is generally what will happen in your playtest. It will come in at the start. We needed to make sure that anything that came through during that period, we could fix, we could workshop out, and we could test and get feedback on. So we did, we just broke our email segments up and did a wave of 10,000 week one, a wave of 10,000, and so forth. But with that one too, there was also another reason we chose to run it that way. We ran it, we let content creators in a week early for everything we did as well too. That's probably one thing we haven't talked about on this. So the officially started in March for players, and we ran it for a month because at that point our players knew that we were running 2-month cadences on our playtest, except for the fact we were releasing in June, but we could not tell our players that. So we ran our playtest for a month. It wrapped up basically end of March to the start of April, which gave us a 2-month window that we knew players weren't going to be talking to us and going, oh, hey, when's the next playtest? And so we could have that little quiet period in there. So that's the other side of planning these things, is if you know that there's things under the hood that you can't talk about, you can use your playtest to hide some of that information from your players as well too. Yeah, so the co-op playtest went really well. Email subscribers went up a lot. But yeah, that wish list, like I said, pulling that, I didn't realize we actually had seen that many wish lists from that one playtest. That was a really fantastic playtest for us. And again, too, it shows that that feature was very important to the people coming into it. So you also know, okay, this is, you know, some cooperative play, communal play is important. So again, that's another stat that we derived very quickly out of all of this. So when talking about playtests, we had a great plan. We were going to do a game. We had our plan. We did everything planned it out, mapped it out, and went, okay, cool. We're going to come out, and when did we say we were going to come out? September 2023. We came out in June 2024. That's because Playtests completely upended everything we did the best possible way. We are much better for doing this, but they take time, they take effort, and they take much longer to develop in doing them. It's when you get a 2-month playtest, you get the feedback, you look at it, you're still making the game as well too. So we needed to continue to make the game and adapt the game where necessary, where we felt the feedback needed to be adapted. And then before the playtest went out, we were doing a week of internal testing ourselves. Then we had our Discord mods come in for a week, and our Discord mods gave us some early feedback. And then it went to content creators, and then it went out to players. So you can see we were basically running a rolling cycle this entire time. So there was a lot of management to do this. But we got to talk about the game in a very, very early state, which is, for better or worse, I think for better. But, some people, again, there are fears in doing this. We knew where we wanted the game to go, and this was fantastic for us to validate our decisions and our understanding on this, and make sure that we weren't so out of touch with our player base and what the player base wanted as well. So that's always very helpful. And again, this was nothing like with China, that really taught us so much more about our audience and where the audience was, what the importance on the audience was. And when we started seeing the 40% pickup in China, we actually started we went, okay, we brought somebody in that's a uni student to help us run some part-times, and they're based in Brisbane with us, and start building out a small social network in China. So we started tapping into Bilibili. We started tapping into what would be called Little Red Book, and just any of those applications we could, because there was an audience there and we needed to find them. We also got really lucky in that one of the creators there was multilingual, and she was actually in our Discord. And so we started talking with, she goes by Amber, we started talking with her a little bit as well too. And she's now actually helping do some of the modding on Little Red Book and those sorts of things as well for us. So we started to build up where we could that international community to help us out. And it's been really, it's been a learning process, and it's been great. But I still don't actually understand certain aspects of it. Bilibili mystifies me, because you can see effectively what we would think from a YouTuber. A fairly small YouTuber can have videos that are getting millions of views, and that's not, I wouldn't say it's super common, but from what we've seen, I don't understand certain aspects of it still, and I don't think I ever will. But there's places like that where small people will get large views, and it's not even properly viral at that stage, but that helped us a lot. And again, too, the fails before we launch. This is great. Like I said, we weren't getting saves. That was one. And again, too, I wrote the tutorial system that is universally not liked. so I rewrote it, and it was much more liked the second time. But those are the things that we learned from our audience. And it's much better to do that than release a game and then find out after you've gone to V1 or even into early access and people don't like it. And we also started to learn about when is your game ready enough. And I joke about this in a way, but it's also, so one of the things that was brought is specifically within the Chinese audience, we talked with a lot of people, tried to learn more about what we could. Again, some of this is just secondhand information, and but one of the things we were told is there's actually an expectation of high quality games there. Cool, that makes a lot of sense. That's fair, but also they will be more vocal about the quality of the games along the way too. So as we started to learn and talk and understand as best we could and digest that for what we needed to, one of our benchmarks was when our Chinese community were yelling at us to release the game. They weren't yelling at us because the game was bad. They were yelling at us to just stop doing playtests and release the game. And we're like, these are the types of benchmarks you want to look for, is when you have the audiences that are going to be the most critical, when they're converting to the point of going, I'm ready for this and I'm ready to invest in this. That's good. And the other side in all of this too is for people that are working with like screen agencies and stuff as well too. We went back to Screen Queensland because they were, we were getting some funding from them, and we had given them our original plan and said, this is what we're going to do. And then we're like, well, actually, now we're doing this. But we talked to them about it. We worked through that with them. And Screen Queensland, I swear you're not actually telling me to say this. Screen Queensland was actually really good in working through this. So make sure you're talking to your partners that include your screen funding agencies to tell them about what you're doing. Talk them through this process if you choose to go in this path and you choose to upend your what you pitched to them originally, so that you can have that conversation early. And because of that, we realized what we should be doing with this too is communicating back what we were learning through this as well too. So we involved them as a stakeholder to make sure that they were also on board to understand that the process was valuable for us, and so that them being supportive of it and not asking us to redo a contract or do a contract variation or all these things. So it was very much a two-way process, and that was really nice because I appreciate communicating stats is a lot easier than renegotiating contracts. So this is an interesting one for us as well too, where we as a studio have been very bad about building community. We started long enough ago that really, well, community was being built and it was still there. Press was still a thing. And so press was really good because press could reach more people than we ever could as a startup studio when we first started. So we didn't invest in the beginning in building up our community. We invested the time in working with press and media to build that for us. And then our second game was working with a publisher, and so that they basically owned everything around it. So we came into game 3 and we had basically no community. We had basically a dead email list of about 1,000 people. And I acknowledge we have a brand awareness. That is something to start from. That's not, a nothing. But we really didn't have a lot. And so we went through this, and now we have an email list of 43,000 subscribers. That's what we built in that time frame. As Anthony said, we've got over 8,000 pieces of feedback, for better or worse, that we have gone through. We have over 7,000 followers on Twitter, and we have over 5,000 members on our Discord server, and that was all built during this project. So that's the type of stats and where you can build yourself from. Like I said, I acknowledge we have brand awareness, but we didn't come into this with a big community to start with. We very much chipped away at this and built this up from scratch. And so I also give a lot of credit to our social media manager for leading the charge on this, because honestly, the email list is one of our biggest and most important communication tools that we have available, as you can see by the contact we have. And so that's not, I write your tweets a couple of times a week. I write a decent, digest. And over time too, with things like building up the email list, we still have, that was taken a few days ago. So that's our current, that's not, it's not like when we released the game, everybody left. And to do that, we are now constantly making sure that we're giving them information that's valuable. We are not marketing and we are not selling to them, because the original transaction was, you give me your email, I give you a code. So we will update them on what the next update is going to be. We will give them some new pieces of information that come out first and foremost in our email, but otherwise we don't talk to them except maybe once a month or once every couple of months. Also though, it's a great communication tool because we found press and media also are in our email list. And so we would see, as playtests went out, we would see people taking our notes that we were putting into those emails, and they were becoming articles. I also know through, because I like to torture myself, I manually went through and looked at these emails, and I found publishers in there who were happily willing to sign up with their publisher email address. So this is a bit, this tool isn't just for users. It's people doing their due diligence on you. It's people checking up on you. It's people who will write about you. So it is the audience is fantastic in here if you can utilize it and give them reason to stay in there. So in terms of how it's going, this is the best one. 10 out of 10 with playtest again. And this is coming from Anthony. That's actually his quote, really. So we are considered what is basically a very successful early access game. I am not going to retire tomorrow. I do not have Ferraris being airdropped by helicopters. But that's we're not wildly successful, but in terms of our stats and what we've seen for us, it's the most stable game we have released to date because we had the feedback. Also, to the other side of that feedback is our demo sat on the exact same code base as our main game, so regardless of it being the playtest or our demo, all of it was the same code base, so that gave us a lot of data points to fix our game along the way. It was our most successful launch to date. It was our highest reviewed game, 93% so far, which I'd like to be 95, but I'm not complaining about 93. Do not get me wrong. But yes, and it's our quickest game to 1,000 reviews. Again, in an early access, in the world of early access, 7 weeks was pretty good. But the other stats that's been really interesting about this too is the peak players for a smaller early access release. We hit 2,200 peak players. And when I talk about, and that was in our first day. And that's what I talk about when I say you are engineering the Steam algorithm to tell people. That's actually a large amount of players for the small, release that we had. But we also had a really good attachment from that in terms of people talk a lot about your old wish lists not converting as well. We actually saw a really high conversion of our old wish lists because they were our core audience and they were our early supporters. And so we actually had a higher turnover on that, which was great. So yeah, we're sitting just shy of 1,200 reviews when I took this, with only 84 negative reviews. I feel okay about that. I really do. And my aim is to, see that number drop over time. And it's great because some of those we know that we've looked at. So you're not going to please everybody. That's fine and that's great. Some of these are just people complaining to us about valid feedback, which is great. I like it. Some of these are things around, I want co-op. I want online co-op. And it's like, yes, I know you do, but it's not even listed as a feature in our game. But thank you for the negative review. I appreciate that. We will get back to that. But also again, the playtest side of this, and this is why we've gotten to this is all, when I talk about engineering success, this is exactly what we're doing, and this is exactly what we engineered in this. We would have gotten more negative reviews releasing this game if we hadn't gone down this path, because we listened to that feedback early, we got it, we fixed it, but also, and this kind of goes back to that giving your game away for free scenario, you're also going to get rid of the people who don't want your game early. And it sounds counterintuitive in a way because, there's that fear of, but I need to survive, I need money, I need to live, to make things. The thing is, though, is how much complaining do you want to put up with from a single user for $20? That's the other side of this. And you really don't, because generally that complaining and that time for addressing each of those individual users and those complaints en masse costs you more than $20 per user. So you would be better off just getting them out of your ecosystem as early as possible and work on the ones who still came into your ecosystem after everything and have problems. And so those 84 negative reviews, those are the people I want to work with because they did actually still, after the year and a bit that we've done everything, they still wanted to spend the money and come into it. And so I want to get that number better for those people. But the nice thing is they're the ones that are valuable to me now in that respect, whereas just I don't like this game. Thanks for the helpful review. Those are the people you really do not want in your ecosystem, and you get rid of them early. So in terms of the references too, as a promise, this is kind of at the end of it. I'll leave this here because There's some really valuable information that we got from talking with Jason. Again, Strafon shares a lot of valuable information out there. So the top one is one of the talks that Jason pointed us to after we talked to him, and he's like, here's something that he did for an earlier GDC talk. When we looked at it, it was behind the paywall vault. It looks like it's free now, so that's much nicer. And Nimbatus was an interesting one, which also kind of was the one that talked about why email lists are important, because Nimbatus was basically, when they did their demo, it was an email of, we'll give you a free demo, you give us the email. So that's kind of where some of this started from as well too. And just generally, one I found when I was looking at Strafon was the last one. I haven't watched that talk yet, but it looks really interesting, and I want to watch it, and I want to see, because they're doing some really great stuff in this field. And they're to me, it's a small studio that most people won't have heard of, but I think they're doing really fantastic things for the size of their studio. So take a look at what Strafon does. Should you choose to go down this route, good luck. Good luck. And you're going to figure it out for yourself. You're going to figure out what works. You're going to figure out what doesn't work, and that's okay, because again, this is the point where it's okay to fail. You're figuring it out before you get there. And I think the other thing to actually that isn't really in the slides to cover in this sort of side of figuring things out for yourself. This also goes, if you think you might do an early access game, this is a really good training time for you to figure out, because early access, they want you to communicate with you. They want to understand roadmaps. They want to understand all these things. So you're learning how to communicate with your audience well and truly in advance of early access, and this is going to train you on how to do that. It's going to train you on how much information, how often do you communicate, when do you communicate changes to your players, when do you communicate, all these sorts of things, but also too, even after we went out and we thought we knew what we had in mind with our game, we had a roadmap out, went into early access, looked at the feedback, and this was the feedback, and this is what we thought we should be doing next. Okay, and feedback's great. But we took that feedback and said, okay, we really probably need to focus on this, but we had already committed to our audience to this. Which do you do? So what we did instead was, we knew that we really needed to do this, but we also wanted to make sure that we weren't the ones changing our minds. So what we did is we put it out to the community and went, okay, here's our plans for the next one. Vote on which one you want. And so then again, too, you can remove yourself and your take from things. And if somebody doesn't like the decision you made, and it's like, but it was the community's decision. And so it's like the old man shouts at clouds. Are you going to shout at my entire community for saying this is what they wanted? So it's also a great way to utilize those sorts of things and extract yourself from the decision-making process. When you're concerned that there might be contention or it might create some things, let your community make that decision for you, because who is that they're going to start yelling at? Developers are easy to yell at, but community is a much harder place to yell at. So we wanted to make sure there was time for questions, because this is a great topic. Also, this was Anthony's decision. Playtests are great, change his mind. But yes, so it's a deep topic. We've scratched the surface, and we're happy to take questions and also just chat along the way too. But we've got 10 minutes, 8 minutes? 7 minutes. So we do have room for some questions if there's anything specific anybody wants to ask on this. Yeah.
How early would you play test? Did you mention that you did yours at 14 months?
So just because we got told, how early would we run a play test? We were, yes, so I think it was about 14 months in, but honestly at that point, that's because we already had other things in motion that we were doing, like announcing the game and a few other things. We showed Jason originally our game, and that was probably 9 or 10 months in, and he was like, you should already be talking about your game. You should be talking about it early as possible, and as soon as you have the basics of your core mechanics in, talk about it.
Because we had a problem doesn't feel good and I don't like your art style. So how do you find a balance and it's good time to show to the players?
So we had a basic art style in at that point.
We sort of had a vertical slice, sort of.
There you go.
Yeah, vertical slice already organized. So we had our art style, we had our basic gameplay loops, we had most of our core features. So we built it in a very iterative fashion so that we were sort of as close to releasable essentially as we could be. That's, I guess, was our strategy for it, to try and allow us to have something that players could engage with, and it's because it is hard to see past boxes and cubes and stuff like that. Yeah.
Oh gosh. Who was first? I didn't see. Go for it.
I was just kind of interested in how you tackled development versus kind of analyzing the playtests. And so would you, as the feedback was coming in during the playtest, be kind of looking at it live and trying to, analyze it straight away? Or would you kind of use playtest time to, just go, oh, we're not going to look at it, we're going to do development stuff, and then, look at it once we've got all once the playtest is over?
Yeah. So the question was, did we analyze the feedback as it came in, or did we stockpile it and look at it at a later date? I was looking at it as it came in. We weren't actioning it necessarily, though. So I was analysing it and collating it, and then when we could all have the time to sit down and actually go through it. If there was anything, if we noticed sort of a trend or a peak, people all saying the same thing, then it might be something you need to action immediately. But generally the plan was to hold on to that information and then make informed decisions at the end of the playtest.
And just to note though, with that bug fixes and complaints on that side, we action more immediately, because the more time that you can get somebody to actually verify that what you're doing is correct to solve that problem, that's much better for your stability. So those we were addressing, but pure feedback, not as quickly. So, go ahead.
This might be a naive question, but are there any conventions around situations where you would pay playtesters versus just this exchange of information?
So paid versus what we did with just community-driven playtests. No, we didn't. There might be options, I guess, to pay. We never went down that route. We had enough players through to get feedback that was valuable, that there wasn't something. The other side is to be fair, with the paid playtests, that's basically a focus group.
You get very different feedback from a paid playtest than
and also too, you need to be organized enough to have your questions in advance. Not gonna, we were organized enough, but we weren't organized enough to be able to start having those questions in advance and making sure that we could get them. We could ask after the fact, but we weren't that organized. So something like that, probably honestly for us at this point, would have been a waste of money to pay, because we wouldn't have had the time to get the value out of it. We needed to pay for focus group testing.
We did get a few small groups of friends and family through into the office to play local builds and get their sort of feedback that way. So that was sort of another side that we didn't really talk about as part of this, but that was we did that well before we launched our first playtests. Yeah. And you do get different feedback from that as well. So.
In the back.
So you mentioned that you have the player able to submit the feedback ticket at any point in the game. Are you capturing game state and sort of other data there to have the qualitative and quantitative?
Just a little bit, not a huge amount. Our game is pretty dynamic, so the decisions that a player has made up until that point is kind of, it's not necessarily useful information at that point in time. We'll store small bits of information. So I said before, I think we store time played, number of players, that sort of stuff. But generally, no, we don't send too much. But we have the ability to if we need to.
And there's somebody a little bit further. Go for it.
Oh, me? Sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
I've got one question. One of the things you said is that you use the playtest to validate whether you could fix something or you should scrap it. At
Yeah, so using playtests as validation and what that did for us in the development process, we were lucky, and there was a few mechanics specifically that didn't gel as properly as they could with players, but ultimately the gameplay loop worked, which was great. So we didn't have, we don't actually have a position in which to talk about it upending. The budget change for us was more about the fact that we then suddenly took 9 months longer to make the game because we were doing the playtest. That was our biggest budget constraint. But in terms of that, I think we redid, besides the tutorial and learning that, we redid the farm mechanic and crop growth. And I can't think of any other major. Nothing major. We got really, we were very lucky in that most of what we had done worked for the player audience. Also, too, this is our third game within the wholesome genre as well. So we kind of have an idea of what expectations there are, and player taste changes, but we had a general idea, so we've been pretty lucky on that side.
It's time, sure. I think that's time, unfortunately. But come up and have a chat to us if you want. But yeah, thank you very much for coming.